Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. Hey, it is Dominic Steele here for Daily Bible Time on a Monday morning, and I'm going to unpack that verse, Colossians chapter 3, verse 16. First words, let the word of Christ. It's Christ's word. It's a word about Christ. It's the word spoken by Christ. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. The word of Christ is to have its gracious way in your life. When as a young adult I was first invited to church, the church I went to, the thing that struck me most powerfully was that the word of Christ was richly indwelling the lives of the people who were sitting around me in that church. And what I mean is, I'd grown up in Roman Catholicism, and in the Catholic Church where I grew up in, the Bible was used. There were talks in the church every week, and in fact they had an Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading, a responsorial psalm, but people listened to the talk and then they actually just did whatever they wanted. And so it was a shock to me as I came to a Bible-believing church to hear people at the end of the talk debating the meaning of what had been said, both debating with the minister in the public question comment time and then discussing with their friends over coffee, food, drinks afterwards. People would say, what does this word mean? And I was struck with the thought, these people are living it. I didn't have the vocab for it then, but what it was, what I observed was the word of Christ was dwelling in them richly. And I could see it in the way they taught and admonished each other. It just kind of flowed naturally out of the fact that Christ's word indwelled them. And that was true of them as individuals, and it was true of them as a group, as a church. So I ask of us, of our church, of Village Church, and I ask, what would somebody think if they came in the door? I mean, it's bizarre, the idea in this COVID season. What if somebody came into Village Church in a month or so's time when we open again? Would they think that Christ's word richly indwells us? My hope is that they would. In fact, people have told me that that is what they have thought. I want to give us permission to have a culture at the end of the formal part of our meeting. I want to give us permission to speak more freely of the word of Christ in our life. You don't need permission. I want to give us encouragement, because we are actually indwelt as individuals richly by this word of Christ. And yet sometimes we actually suppress that. And after church, we can talk about our week and we can engage in a fairly shallow level. I love it when I see in our community glimpses that we're getting to the point where over supper, over morning tea, over dinner after church, we're teaching and admonishing one another, when that just happens spontaneously in our conversations, when we're putting questions to each other over supper. So are you two back on each other's Christmas card list yet? And where the conversations finish with prayer as we pray for each other